Wisconsin, Michigan, right, if he doesn't win those. But he does manage to win Pennsylvania, flips Georgia, and holds North Carolina. That's that narrow 270, 268 path.
Right. And from Harris's standpoint, too, if she were to get Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and nothing else, she's at exactly 270 as well.
Right.
And again, if she loses Pennsylvania, she's got to offset it with 2 from those Sun Belt states. So it's the first among equals when you talk about these swing states.
You know, one of the nightmare scenarios that have been keeping me up at nights, but I don't think is a possibility anymore or likely, was when Biden was in the race, and it really looked like he was going to have to kind of hold that blue wall. His polling in Nevada looked really bad. And to the extent they were polling that single congressional district around Omaha and Nebraska, too, it looked like he had a shot at that. He had a shot at holding the blue wall, even losing Nevada, even losing Arizona, even losing Georgia, holding that one congressional district and just getting 270. And I worried about what that would mean, you know, afterwards, pressure on Nebraska lawmakers, et cetera, like that. That narrow path seemed a little different now that Nevada seems to be polling in a different way.
Yeah, although Nevada is always, you know, they always say notoriously difficult, you know,
yes,
a state to poll there. And there's always been demographically opportunity for Republicans in Nevada because you have that huge rural, you know, blue-collar white population there that's been trending so Republican. But, yeah, look, Harris has made strides with non-white voters, Hispanic voters in particular, young Hispanic voters. This is where there was the biggest slack with Biden.
The Kamala Harris campaign is just, despite the fact that people like Fox and others are trying to criticize it, clearly is hitting home runs. The latest poll figures are incredible. Bearing in mind, her campaign is still in its early threshold.
Where are you going to find voters like that in the battleground? Less likely you're going to find them in a Wisconsin, you know, Michigan, Pennsylvania. More you're going to find them in those Sun Belt states. So there's more opportunity for the Democrats down there. But that being said, you know, again, Biden winning Georgia, that's the first time a Democrat had won that state since 1992, and it was by just under 12,000 votes. Arizona was basically 10,000 votes. So these are extremely narrow margins that Biden took these states by. And there is a pull of sort of, you know, political history there that keeps these states very winnable for Republicans.
Totally. Now, there's 2 aspects about those states, Arizona and Georgia, that I think are interesting. Because something you've been talking about in sort of as you've been briefing all of us, right, is about, you know, there's the polling, right? But then there's the kinds of people living in the kinds of places they are and the kinds of voting groups Democrats do better with in the Trump era versus Republicans. One of the things that sort of characterizes Georgia and Arizona is just enormous metro areas as a share of total vote for the state, right? So that Georgia, that Atlanta area, that Phoenix area, as Democrats have done better in metro areas, including out into the suburbs, that's been a richer pool of votes for them and part of the math that allowed them to pull off 2020.
Well, right. The metropolitan areas, cities and really metropolitan areas, suburbs that are fast growing, too. Yes. That's what you're talking about there. You know, the Atlanta metro area, extremely fast growing. And that's where the Democrats, you have counties there that Democrats were losing, you know, by 30 points, you know, say 20 years ago.
Mitt Romney even won by enormous 2012,
amounts. Yeah. That they can now win by double digits. You've got, you know, they're rapidly diversifying. They're filling with Democratic-friendly demographics. So you've got that in Georgia. They've got that in Arizona. North Carolina is another interesting one in the battleground because that sort of exists for Democrats. You know, the Research Triangle, you know, talking about the Raleigh-Chapel Hill area. You talk about it in Mecklenburg County where Charlotte is. You've got that if you're a Democrat. But if you're a Republican, you look at North Carolina and you say, well, the Democrats have been flexing their muscle in those metro areas. Trump has been driving up enormous margins, you know, in rural counties across the state. And not just rural counties, some mid-sized counties as well. Because I think, relatively speaking, there's a larger blue-collar white, you know, non-college white population there as a share of the electorate in North Carolina.
Voters saying they trusted the ex-president more on the issue of immigration by 17 points. Flash forward to the latest edition of that same poll released just on Sunday. Trump's advantage has eroded considerably. He leads Vice President Kamala Harris by just 9 by U.S. Border Patrol at the U.S.-Mexico border from October 2020, right? We're still in the thick of COVID, until July of 2024. Okay? You can see it starts low. We have the pandemic. Not a lot of people crossing. Then begins to rise. People are more comfortable being outside again. I want to bring your attention to what happened starting in January of this year. Look at that. The numbers fall sharply and then continue to trend down. The latest data from July shows border encounters were at their lowest point since September of 2020 in the teeth of the pandemic. Now, I think that's pretty notable. First of all, no one's...
Yeah, for once, we've been really good and consistent about a message, and it's a simple message that's true. Listen, forever, Republicans talked about the border but didn't really care about it. In fact, they wanted the border to be a mess because, as you mentioned, it was their oxygen. It was the way in which they convinced people to be scared of folks who came from a different country or spoke a different language from them. And so when they were presented with this bill that would have dramatically declined the number of people arriving at the border, they panicked. They realized that they might lose this issue electorally, and Donald Trump told all his lieutenants in the Senate to vote against it. And so what we essentially did was call their bluff, right? They said they wanted to fix the border. We gave them a bill that would have done it. They voted against it, and it exposed for the entire country their real agenda, which is to just complain about immigration and complain about the border as a means to try to divide Americans from each other. And so the message is really tight and simple. You can tell the story in 15 seconds. Democrats and Republicans wrote the toughest border security bill in decades. Donald Trump killed it because he wants the border to be a mess. And it kind of speaks to the sort of underlying insincerity that people believe is at the heart of Donald Trump. So it's not a hard story to sell. It has the convenience of being true as well.
Yes, it's 100% true. Let me ask you this, which is a sort of devil's advocate question. I think Republicans will make this argument. I want to get you to respond to it. So one of the arguments during these negotiations was the president has a unilateral power. He doesn't need legislation. Legislation's a crutch. And after that, Trump killed that bipartisan legislation. The president did take some executive action at the border. And we've seen, again, this huge drop. Now, again, everyone wants it to be this like cause and effect. You press a button and this, we're talking about tens of thousands of desperate human beings making decisions under unbelievably calculated decision spaces. But what do you say to people who say, look, we were right. We didn't need a bill. President pushed the button. Numbers go down.
So it is true that actions of the Biden-Harris administration have resulted in crossings at the border being lower today than they were at the end of the Trump administration. That is a combination of really good and smart diplomacy with Mexico, diplomacy that, frankly, won't be available to Donald Trump. He will have an antagonistic relationship with Mexico, and due to the fact that the Biden administration did end up implementing through executive order sections of that bipartisan bill. The problem is it's not clear whether those executive orders will stand up in court. It is still an open question as to whether they have the legal authority to do that. So, of course, the administration first pursued making those changes, the emergency power they have to shut off the border, the changes in asylum to expedite how we process those claims through statute. And only when they failed because of Republican obstinance did they move to implement it by executive order. And that, in combination with the diplomacy with Mexico, has made a big difference, which is why Americans look at the record of Joe Biden in reducing crossings at the border. They look at the hypocrisy of Donald Trump turning down the ability to have a bipartisan achievement, and they are starting to come to the conclusion that maybe Democrats are actually better when it comes to the issue of immigration and border security.
Well, that's the other, you just said immigration and border security. That to me is sort of been one of my kind of abiding pet peeves in this whole discourse, right, is that immigration gets reduced to the border. And my own feeling is the country deserves an immigration system that's orderly, humane, and in the national interest, right? It should be, we don't want chaos. We also want people to be treated like human beings that have dignity and we respect. And also that's good for the country, and it's on that last point that I thought the DNC did a pretty good job. And I think obviously Kamala Harris talking about her parents, right, being immigrants themselves, which is like, that part of the equation, which is we're really lucky as a nation that a lot of people want to come here who are amazing people. And it is really good for us. That part gets completely lopped out of the discussion the more that you talk about the border as this sort of like fixation.
So people do not want to give up on immigration as a core American value. Right, exactly. And so they do not find Trump's message in the nation's best interest. But they are also not interested in a party that doesn't talk about border security in the context of a broader immigration reform agenda. And for a long time, Democrats didn't really lead with a conversation about fixing the border. We talked mainly about how we humanely treat folks who are already in the country, which is an important topic. But all of a sudden, our message resonates with a broad cross-section of Americans because they actually want a country that allows folks to flee torture and terror and economic destitution, but they want it done in an orderly manner. So when Democrats start by talking about border security and then use that as a means to then talk about a pathway to citizenship and quicker work permits, it just creates a buy-in from the American public, which results in the Republican advantage disappearing, in part because they really don't want this dystopian world where their local sheriff is turned into an attendant to open-air detention camps of migrants, which is what Trump is selling.
They are. They're on a slippery pole.
Thank you.
They really are. And if they think that some of the crap Don Shitsy Pants and J.D. Vance have been coming out with just in the last few days is going to put the swingometer the other way, I can't see it.
Today's a perfect example, a remarkable contrast candidates. I mean, I actually love this kind of holiday, Labor Day setup that we're looking at between Harris and Trump. First, the optics of Donald Trump sitting like little Richie Rich, or I guess old Richie Rich, at the golf club in Palm Beach that he owns. Not just that he's a member of, that he owns. He's sitting there by himself ringing his bell for Diet Coke. Vice President Harris is out there with raucous crowds of working-class voters across the country. And the other contrast that we seem to often lose in the Trump years is that there actually are policies.
Let me just say, my father, Donald's older brother, was in ROTC at Lehigh University and then voluntarily went into the Air National Guard, the only one in the Trump family to ever serve. In fact, I had the honor of using his trunk, his Army trunk, throughout my summer camp days. Everything about him, and we spoke the last time we were here about how I had the honor of meeting Senator McCain, a word that has been cheapened over the years. But I said to my kids, Andrea, Christopher, who were there, and my wife, Lisa, this is a genuine hero. Okay, let's make no mistake about it. The fact that Donald called him, in essence, a loser, I don't get it. But anyone who is disabled or anyone who he deems lesser than him is a loser, okay, that's just the way he is. That ain't going to change.
Why do you think people in the military support him?
I have no idea. And I know many people who were in the military, and I had the pleasure of speaking on an interview with National Defense Radio, which goes out to the armed services. And I told the truth. I basically told this story, and I said, he just doesn't give a shit about them. He just doesn't. It's the great Godfather 2, one of the last scenes when Sonny says, "Country ain't your blood, kid." And Michael Corleone says, "No, I don't believe that." Donald believes in Donald.
This guy has made it clear how he stands. He's sitting down at Mar-a-Lago after he got elected president, and this was his exact quote. He's talking to a bunch of folks at Mar-a-Lago. "You're rich as hell, and we're going to give you a tax cut." At the same time, he was telling workers they get paid too much already. That's who this guy is. You tell me who in Wisconsin is sitting around saying, "Damn, I wish they'd give billionaires tax cuts and screw me over. Damn, I wish they'd take my health care away. I wish they'd underfund my public school. I wish they would make my job more difficult and more dangerous. And then at the end of the day, I wish they'd make me work till I'm 75 years old." No one's saying that. No one's asking for that agenda. What they're asking for is to be treated fairly with dignity. That's what we have. Look.